Hello Muglets, today will probably be a pretty quick video. I just kind of want to do a little experiment with Xiao here. There'll be some numbers, there'll be some frame comparisons, and I think that's about it. We're basically just going to compare his plunge to his basic attacks. I'll say right off the bat that for AoE situations where you have a couple of enemies surrounding you and his basic attack won't actually be hitting them, obviously plunge spam is going to be better. But what about for single target situations? The test is going to be rather simple. We're just going to look for a Ruin Guard. I think a Ruin Guard is a pretty solid test for this, and we're going to see how long it takes to kill him with plunge spam plus E versus basic attack. So we're starting with our first Ruin Guard here. We're just going to enter Q mode and do our E's first of all, and just start doing basic attacks. I did do a charge attack in there, but let's just forget about that. We're gonna do our best to avoid him. Do a and right at the end of his ult there, we are currently no longer in ult, the Ruin Guard died. So it took us pretty much exactly one ult to kill him. It wasn't a super perfect run. We will compare more in depth a little bit later, but for now let's just get the rest of the footage we need, which means gathering another Ruin Guard. Unfortunately, this one might be slightly higher or lower level. Indeed, this is a level 91. I believe the last one was 85. I don't really think the level difference will matter that much, but just in case it does, we'll use this next Ruin Guard to do charged attack spam, and then we'll use the last one for plunge attack spam. We're gonna go ahead and go in ult mode, start with his two E's, and just do some charge attacks. Oh, that kind of puts a damper on the whole situation here. Well, I think we got enough data. We're not necessarily going to be looking at how long it takes to kill a Ruin Guard, more about the numbers. There are also different levels of his plunge. You could do a short plunge or a longer plunge. We're just gonna be doing what feels natural on this level 87, which is actually quite a bit closer to our first level of Ruin Guard. Also, as you probably have noticed by now, we're doing this without any sort of buffs or anything to try and keep things consistent. This one will get swirled a bit because of the water, but that's not a big deal. All right, here we go. So plunge spam. There's a short one just for reference, I guess, but this is pretty much generally what you're gonna do, I guess. We're gonna try some short ones just to see the time difference as well. Okay. Do we actually need to do anything here? Well, whatever, we've gone too far. Just from that not even a test, it's pretty easy to tell his plunges are pretty OP, but I still want to know the difference. Like, how much worse is it to just do normal attacks on a single target enemy? Because, you know, just based on what I have focused on here, at least versus a single target enemy, the difference isn't that big. I also believe I forgot to do his E to start, so we should probably do that as well. So let's go find one final Ruin Guard. Oh no, this is a big one. That doesn't work. Guess we have to kill him anyway. Wow, that's crazy. I'm actually hitting this dude twice. I'll need to look at that in editing as well. Here should be a normal one. So here will actually be the plunge spam test, starting with the two E's, and then he should be dead before we get another E really. Let's just start. And hope he doesn't, do that. That ruins it a little bit, but yeah. Also, depending on if he misses a couple crits or not, but I didn't see too many missed crits either with plunge or with the basic attacks. So I think that's enough data that we can go ahead and go in editing, and you're gonna actually join me for this, whether you like it or not. Well, I guess you could leave the video if you want to, but so here we are going into ult mode. There was a charge attack, so we can compare this to the other Ruin Guard as well, which is good, the one we did the charge attack, which will also tell us how much of a difference there is from a level 85 to a 91, which is good. So we got a 10.95 on his charged there, and we hit the other Ruin Guard with charged as well. So here we have a 10.57 with a charged, a 10.78, a 10.98. So that first one was a 10.57. Over here on the 85 Ruin Guard, our charge was a 10.95. We also did hit this higher level Ruin Guard for a 10.98, which is a bit higher than the lower level Ruin Guard. The thing with Xiao is the further into his battle, the more damage he gets. This was pretty early on, as you can tell from the Ruin Guard's health bar there. And this 10.98 was around when he was about half dead. So there is a little bit of a difference here, but I don't think it's enough to really sway the overall outcome one way or the other too heavily, but I guess that is something to be aware of, although we're not going to take it much into consideration for the test. And yeah, I actually wanted to see this double hit again. Yeah, you can see that we're hitting his like face there for 8,000 and then again for 20k at the bottom. I thought that was pretty neat. So I think what we're gonna do to make this a little simpler is just to calculate how long it takes him to do a full plunge, jump, and land attack, and then see how many basics he can get in that time, or how much damage. So we can take a lot of my own mistakes out of the equation, like, you know, not doing an E the third time here, or getting hit by the Ruin Guard or whatever. We're gonna go frame by frame here. We do go ahead and do the E's as well, of course, but yeah. So on the moment of liftoff, you can see here, I would say it's about here. This is the point at which he leaves the ground, so we're going to split that. And then going up, I think that's a pretty good height for a plunge attack. You can notice he does pull out his glider there just for a second, less than a second actually, before he goes into the plunge animation. Oh, does this guy also get hit in mid-air too? I never noticed that. But yeah, you can see a 7,800 proc up there. And then I guess we'll see another number down here. Yep, there's the 20k. That makes things even more complicated, because like, bigger enemies could get hit twice, but I don't think that happens with smaller enemies unless you're like landing directly on them. I'm not sure if we should even count the upper number there. Naturally, it's going to be good for bigger enemies that do get hit on him falling down. And this is kind of a test versus, you know, single target. Single target enemies are usually bigger, like these Ruin Guards. Ah, my head hurts. I thought this was pretty neat too. Ruin Guard and Xiao synchronized plunge attacks. Here we go. Of course, the Ruin Guard won that one. Back to the topic at hand. I think we're going to say it takes exactly as long until Xiao gets back up into the air for his second plunge attack. So here, but -1 frame right before he jumps. That means this right here is one plunge attack. We can watch it real quick. We can see it takes approximately 1.5 seconds, a tiny bit less. Using the same method, we will compare a couple of others, like his very next, to see how much of a difference there can be. This frame, -1. There we go. This is the time code for the very next plunge attack. You can see this one is actually much shorter at 1.13 seconds, but you can also see the damage is lower because it was a lower plunge. The slightly shorter plunge attack does deal a lot less damage, but also in a shorter time. We can also see which method is better in that case. Also with the shorter one, he actually does not get his glider out. I guess this could perhaps be a matter of pressing the space bar super quickly. And then here's a super tall plunge attack as well. It looks a bit taller than it is because the Ruin Guard was actually kind of in a different camera angle. We can also see how long this one takes. And with this one, he actually does not get his glider out either, which I thought was interesting. I don't know what made him get the glider out in the first one, but regardless. Well, this one actually seemed longer, but it's exactly the same amount of time as the first one, where he did pull out his glider a bit, as you can see here. 1.467. Same damage as well. 19.9k damage in 1.467 seconds, or 15.9k in 1.1 seconds. Any math geniuses already figure this out? Also, we can assume these 3 plunge attacks were in the span of the same 3 seconds. I guess, even though that seems a little bit weird, but he has the exact same 19.9k damage from the third plunge as he does of the first plunge. So if we assume this plunge damage happened exactly when he got that little damage boost, and this one ended right before the threshold for the other one, then I guess that makes sense. Still very tight timing and a little bit complicated because Xiao does get those boosts, so it's hard to compare one to the other, but yeah. We can assume this is all within the same damage window. And since we're dealing with pretty small amounts of time here, we're actually going to go DPMS, damage per millisecond, instead of damage per second. And then of course we could just times 1000 to get the actual DPS number. So Xiao with short plunge has 14.1 DPMS, or of course 14,104 damage per second. With a longer plunge, we actually have a DPMS of 13.6, so about 13,605 damage per second. So then that means for the most damage per second possible, you want to do short plunges. I think that's some pretty good information. Even the short plunge, you can see the second damage number up here, so we're not even going to consider that anyway. If you could only get that first hit of around 8,000 there with a longer plunge, then of course that would win by a lot. According to in-game information, he only has a low and a high plunge damage multiplier, so those must be the two we just discussed. One has a 280% multiplier, and one has a 349% multiplier at level 8 anyway, which sounds like a pretty big difference, but the short ones don't do that much less damage and they take quite a bit less time actually. A third of a second, but I guess it adds up. I wouldn't worry about it too much as the difference is pretty small. So how does this compare to basic attacks? This is going to be a little bit hard as well. I want to find a string of basic attacks that crit, because we're comparing crit plunges, but also a string of attacks that doesn't really exceed 1 whole second. I mean, his basic attacks are pretty instantaneous, so I'm finding it pretty hard to find a decent string of basic attacks where they're kind of all criticaling, but I think we'll probably stick with this little string here. There's like a non-crit in there, but I guess that is sort of realistic. So I think we'll start with this strike here at this 5400. Just before it pops up, we'll start the timer, and we'll go ahead and get a time code in there. This does also give the favor to the basic attacks as we are nearing the end here, but what can you do? It's never going to be perfect. Let's just see how close we get. So we're starting with this 5452. After that, a 6564 pops up, and then we have a non-crit 1477, and that ends that string. That's pretty much the optimal damage we can get in that same time to do a plunge attack. But you also have to remember, if that plunge attack, this, best case scenario plunge attack, short hop crit, if it doesn't crit, it's obviously going to be pretty weak as well. And those three numbers add up to 13,493, or a DPS of 12,079, partially in favor of basic attacks as we are pretty deep into his ult. These are like the last hits of his ult here, but also one of them didn't crit, whereas the plunge attacks we were testing did crit. So I think it kind of makes up for it a bit. If we were to allow ourselves to extend our time to the longer plunge, the 1.467, I believe it was, one more frame. Yep, there we go. But even if we were to do that, it still wouldn't really compare to the long plunge either. And then you have to take into consideration there is no chance we're getting that first hit on the Ruin Guard's head. Whether this happens with all big enemies or just like Ruin Guards, I don't know. I would assume it kind of does. If it's a small enemy and the initial spear striking him before hitting the ground, if that attack doesn't work, then basic attacks are sort of comparable. Still a little bit weaker, but plunge attacks are king, and that's basically what we have learned today, which was already known before I made this video, but hey, I like to do things myself. And hopefully there was something of interest or value for you in here as well. If so, that's awesome. Make sure to drop a like on the video. If you have any thoughts on the video, leave a comment down below. Thanks, as always, for watching, and until next time. This is gonna be weird to edit.